Hi, Phil here from Art Tutor, and welcome to the fifth lesson in this art isolation series. So this lesson I'm going to be using pastels, and I'm going to be doing a couple of rose studies. More than anything else, this lesson is going to be about using the materials and playing about with the materials that are available to you. So I've got a couple of little studies that I did yesterday. This one with pastel pencils, just the materials that I had at home. This one was with soft pastels. Now I say soft pastels, I use that term very loosely because what I actually used was a very cheap set that I managed to get from Amazon. A set of 64 that was about, I think it was about £12, $15, something like that. Really, really cheap because pastels are expensive. The good quality ones are really expensive. And amazing to use, stunning to use. The amount of pigment in them is just a joy to lay down on kind of pastel paper. These are more like chalks, I would say, coloured chalks. A bit more, that's probably a bit unfair to them. There's a bit more pigment in them than chalk. But it was just to see whether or not we could take some really cheap materials and still use the kind of overall guiding principles of what makes a composition and a piece of art quite strong. Those values, strong darks and nice lights, even with really cheap materials. Anybody that wants to maybe dabble with pastels and have a little go, this set that I'm going to be using is really affordable. And so they're a reasonable entry into this medium. So if we take a look at the reference photograph, this is one that I took yesterday, just in my backyard. Nice sunny day, so some nice strong cast shadows there and form shadows. So that's going to help us. Whenever you've got nice strong shadows, it always makes your life easier as an artist. And because I'm going to be using two different sets of materials, I'm going for two different styles as well. One that's a little bit more sketchy, one that's probably a little bit more painterly. This isn't going to be, a single piece of artwork. This is going to be two separate and distinct studies. So this would be something that, you just work on in your sketchbook. There's going to be all kinds of marks. You can see here I've got, all kinds of marks that I've been testing about and playing about with the materials. And these are great, to look back on over time through your sketchbook. If you want a reminder of how different mediums work with different subjects, which one works best. I've got a feeling that if I just improve this slightly, this might be the better one, but we'll see. All right then, so in terms of materials, the most important one for pastels, in my opinion, is the paper surface. In fact, I'd say this is the case for a lot of mediums. So the paper surface tends to have a bigger impact on the style of artwork that you do and the overall look and feel. And this one here is called, it's by Canson, and it's called Mi Teintes. I think I pronounced that right. So this is just a pad of different earth tones, they call it. So we've got some there's a light cream there, then there's a beigey colour, there's an olivey colour and a brown at the back. You can get this in grey tones as well. But the actual surface itself, if I just bring this one back in, has got two sides to it. So this is the smoother surface, and if I just put a little bit of colour down on there, you can see that surface there. And then if I flip that over, you see I've just had a little go about with some of the colours. You can see there's a bit more texture in that. It's like a honeycomb texture. And there's no right or wrong texture, it's personal preference. But this one here, the honeycomb texture, because the peaks and troughs in the texture are more prominent, it'll tend to grab onto the pastel a little bit better. And so typically you can add a few more layers. Personally, I prefer the smoother side, particularly for quicker studies, because it just means I don't have to work the pastel as hard into the surface to get rid of all of this texture. So that's the paper surface I'm going to be using. If you've got other pastel papers at home, use them, see what the effect is like. But if you want a recommendation for a good all-round pastel paper, Canson Mi Teintes is probably the number one recommendation I would give. Relatively affordable. Pastel papers aren't the cheapest. This is relatively affordable and a really good paper. Now the first study, the pink rose, we're going to do with pastel pencils. And my favourite, anybody that's seen any stuff that I've done before will know, is Faber Castell. And this is a set of 36. These aren't cheap. A set of 36 are going to cost $50, $60, 50 odd pounds. You can get a set of 60 as well. Fantastic pencils to use, got lots of pigment in. But the one criticism that I would have of them is, especially this set of 36, is their colour selection. So within this 36, we've got a nice range of colours. The ones I've picked out there, you'll see in a moment, are going to be for this study. You've got a nice range of colours, but you don't have a red. So you know, if I wanted to do that bright red rose from the reference photograph, I can't do that with this set. I'd need to go and get, I think it's a scarlet red and a deep red. Faber Castell do that, do those colours. I'd need to go and order those separately and add them to the set. And there's a few colours within this set of 36 that are very, very similar, kind of neutral greys. And I don't understand why you wouldn't put the 3 primaries within a set of 36. But anyway, we've got to work with what we've got. So as you'll see when I kind of go through the colour choices, I don't have a pink. I don't have pinks to match what's on the reference. And it's not going to be a problem. We're just going to use what we've got. Other materials that I'm going to have, kneadable eraser. Pretty much every time I do something, I've got a kneadable eraser. And then to sharpen the pastel pencils, a craft knife and a sanding block. Same as the charcoal pencils, if you saw that earlier lesson. You can't sharpen these with a pencil sharpener. Just don't attempt it. They're too expensive. You know, if you start breaking these, it's going to be really, really frustrating. But what you'll notice is I don't sharpen them. Let's get another example. I don't really sharpen them before I do a piece of artwork, because what I don't want to do is start sanding all of this quality pigment away into the dustbin when in the early stages of a piece of artwork I don't need a sharp point. I'm laying in blocks of colour, I'm kind of laying in major tones and major values. It's only towards the end of a painting that I need a sharp point to tighten up some of the crisper lines and some of the shadow areas. So why not wait until then to sharpen your pencils? It's just going to extend the life of them a little bit. Alright, so I'm working from an iPad, so I'm just going to bring that in and put it to one side for a moment. And then we just zoom in a little bit on this pink rose. And I'm just going to take you through the process that I always go through for colour selection. Now, when I looked through my set of 36 Faber-Castell pastel pencils, I really couldn't find anything that was this kind of pinky colour. The colours are all very muted, they're quite pastel-y, you know, as you would expect. You know, but I would expect at least within a set of 36 to have a couple of vibrant primaries in there. There's nothing really that matches the pink. The best that I could find was this kind of peachy, pinky colour, and you can see how different that is to the reference photograph. But that's what I'm going to use as my base. So this is going to be what's called my local colour. And the local colour, without getting too technical, if you just think what is the one colour that you would pick out for a subject, ignoring the bright highlights and the dark shadows, what's the one colour that you would choose that is the underlying colour, and that's the local colour. And then I'm also going to use it, I don't know if you can see in there, there's quite a bit of yellow around here. And I think the yellow will go quite nice with that. So I've just picked out this, it's not going to show up great on here, but just picked out this kind of muted yellow. It's not a bright canary yellow. I don't want something that's really, really bright and strong and vivid. I want something that's quite pastel-y. So I've got that one. And then I need something darker for the shadows. So I had a little look through the colours that were available. And I've got this brown here for the darker shadows. But I want something with a little bit more of a kind of maybe a pinky maroony colour in, something with a bit more red in that's not too far away from this. And what I've got is this one. So it's a little bit redder, a bit softer than this one here. But we're going to use these three here as this will be like the mid-tone and the two shadow colours. And then we've got a little bit of some yellow tones in there. And then I've obviously got the white, which again is not going to show up too much on top of the white paper, but it will on top of these colours. So I've got the white, not got a lot left in that one. You can see how short and stubby it is. If you do go out and buy a set of pastel pencils, by the way, especially the more expensive ones, just get yourself an extra white. You can get these as singles from most art stores, certainly from Amazon. So get yourself an extra white because you will use this more than anything else. And then for the leaves or the greenery, I'm going to use that yellow again because there's quite a bit of yellow in the reference photograph. You can see along the stalk and this bit around here. But I've got this olivey green. Let's put it down here, away from the white. So I've got quite a muted green. And then I've got this more, I guess it's like a sap green, but it's just got a little bit more vibrancy to it, a little bit more colour in it. And then, I don't know whether I'll use this, but this is for, where can we put this over here? This is going to be for the leaves. Perhaps I'll just need a few darks. It's a bit of a darker green on there. And then for the shadow colours, I've got this lighter grey, which needs sharpening a bit. So I've got that lighter grey there, and then I've got a darker grey. So the actual colours you can see are not really anything like the colours that I've got in the flower. And if the goal was to recreate something kind of photographic, or if I just wanted to recreate something in this colour string and this colour palette because I really like that colour palette, then I'd need to go out and get those. Obviously, I'd need to add to my set of 36. So what I'm going to be looking at are things like these shadow shapes here, the dark shadows overall on the left-hand side of the petals there, the shadows around here, the shadows on the floor. They're the things that are important. And if I can do that with one set of colours, I can do it with another set of colours. It really doesn't matter what colours I use. Okay, so what I'm going to do is flip this piece of paper over so it's on the smoother side, and we'll make a start. Okay, let's draw these out then. So I've probably got to be a bit more careful about where I place them, just so it shows up reasonably well for you on the camera. So I'm going to do the pink one here and the red one there. In this study, if you're doing this in your sketchbook at home, then you probably want to have a portrait orientation, you know, so you can get in the length of the stalks and maybe a few more leaves. But just so I can do them a little bit bigger, so they show up a bit easier, I'm going to keep it to landscape. So the first one I'm going to place somewhere around about here, and then we'll do the red one. I'll come on to the drawing of that a little bit later. We'll put that one there. So if we focus on the first sort of petal, the main petal, I'm just looking at what is the size of that comparative to the overall shape that I want to draw. And then I'm just going to break this into a series of straight lines. So you've got this nice straight line here, and I'm just looking at the angle of that comparative to the horizontal. So if there's a parallel horizontal to the bottom of my paper, it's slightly up off the horizontal, and that's the easiest way to gauge your angles. If it's one that's more vertical, you just judge it to the vertical. And then once you've got this central petal in, the main petal, it's quite easy then to look at the shapes that are around and just look at those as abstract shapes. So you can see I'm not trying to draw a rose, I'm not thinking about a rose at all. I'm just trying to draw these abstract shapes. I'm looking at this shape that's left here, and I've got that wrong, so it needs to be higher up here. If I look at that space in there and compare it to the reference, that's what I need to be looking at. And it's just a really, really good habit to get into, to do this whenever you draw anything. So if I take this line across, it's around about where this breakpoint is, maybe a little bit lower. And then for the rosebud, is it, I guess, the leaves have folded back. And then I'm just going to take the stalk down. So I'm not too worried about the leaf. This is more of a, I'll probably just put that in very quickly at the end. But again, rather than just putting it in as this almond, basic almond shape, which is what we've all learned as the symbol for a leaf, an almond shape with a line and then veins coming off, I'm just going to try and look at some of the straight edges just to get something that's a bit more of a varied shape. And then I can just erase some of those lines. This is heavier than what normally you would draw, but it's just to help it show up a little bit more on the camera. I'm just going to dab that back a little bit. Okay, so we can start adding some colour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the peachy colour, the yellow colour and the white close to hand. I'm going to focus on these three colours and just block in as much of the paper surface as I can. Now, just like coloured pencils, if you followed that tangerine lesson, it's all about pressure. The more pressure that I use, if I just do this to the side, the more pressure that I use, the less opportunity I've got to put colour on top. And the reason for that is that I'm starting to obliterate and get rid of the paper texture and the paper tooth, and so there's nothing to grab onto the pastel. And the pastel on top just skids across the surface. If I allow some of the tooth to show through, you can clearly see there's tooth showing through there. It means there's still an opportunity to work colours on top. Now, if I really dig this pastel in and get a nice sharp point, I still can get highlights on top, but I've got to really dig it in. And that's fine for small flecks of highlight here and there, but it's not great if I want to create an area that's a bit lighter and that's gently transitioning into an area that's a bit darker. So the way that I use pastel pencils and the way that I've found is best is just to lightly block in your colours at first and just accept that you're going to have to do a couple of different layers, a couple of passes. So I'm going to go through this now, and I'm going to use more pressure where I see a darker area. So a bit more pressure there for the shadow, a bit more pressure there, more pressure here, because I know I'm not going to have to put too many colours on top of that. Dark shadow area under there, and then just a nice light colour across the top. You know, this colour is what I was calling the local colour, this underlying base colour, is going to appear pretty much everywhere. So looking at the reference photograph, it's a pink rose, and pink is, you know, right throughout, even in the lightest highlights. There's pink tones within that, even in the darker shadows, there's pink tones within it. So pretty much all of this rose head, I want to get this local colour or base colour in. The exception maybe is this area, because it's more yellow than anything else. So there's quite a bit of yellow in there, and I'll just take that down into the top of the stem and the stalk, because I can see quite a bit of yellow in that. Maybe put a bit into the leaf as well. So all I'm doing is very, very roughly starting to figure out where the darker shapes are, the darker shadow shapes. Alright, and then when I've got that colour in, let's bring in just a little bit of yellow. So just bringing it up from the bottom. And what this will do is merge with the pastel that I've put down, and it will start to blend itself. So I don't do a lot of blending with, not with pastel pencils anyway, with a finger or a blending stump. Very rarely use a blending stump. You know, I do when I blend, I tend to use my finger. But for something like this, because I can blend with each subsequent layer of pastel, I don't really need to use a blending tool. And even at this early stage as well, what I'm noticing within this flower and the nature of this flower and its texture is there's kind of like striations from this centre part that radiate out. So if I make my marks in that direction, hopefully, and I remember to do that throughout, hopefully some of those marks will remain at the end of the drawing or painting, whatever you want to call it. Okay, and then what about some white? So there's quite a few white tones in there. This is a light area around here. You can see some nice whites in there. So again, trying to retain those marks, this upward hatching mark. Quite light on the top there. There's a nice light piece at the end. Around here is quite light. Okay, and then let's take one of the darker colours. So I picked out two. This one's a little bit more reddy, maroony, I suppose, and this one's a bit more brown. So I'm going to go for the lighter one of the two first, just to see how much of that colour actually registers. And it's got a bit of a sharper point on this, which is a good thing, because I can just start to define a little bit more of the edges now and a bit more of the details. So this is a nice dark shadow area here. And even now that isn't really registering very well. And you'll find that with some colours, they do grab onto the surface better than others. So this other brown, where have you gone? This other one here, well, that's not registering much better either. I'm going to stick with this maroon one. So you can see I've just switched back to the main colour there. Just want to start bringing up some of this a bit more around the shadow areas. As you add in the shadow areas, by the way, you'll start to notice the colours that you've put down where the areas that are too light are, they become more obvious. Let's go back. I don't want to get too distracted with that one, so I need to put plenty more shadows in yet. So this is a strong dark shadow in here. Just going to use some hatching marks for that. Some little dark shadows just under the lip of this petal that's folding over. Same here. So I'm digging that pencil in quite strong there. That's probably about a 7 or an 8 out of 10 in terms of the pressure that I'm using, just because I know it's a really strong dark. So this area hatching. And then I'm going to go back in with the white, and I want to just define some of the areas. What I'm actually going to do is just sharpen some of these pencils now. So we'll just have a 30-60 second break. Obviously not for you, I'll just come straight back in. But I'm going to sharpen these pencils because it's at this stage that I want to be able to start defining some areas. I want colour to register over, well, there's quite a lot of pastel down now, so a sharper point is going to help that. And if by magic, there we go, sharpened pencils. So let's add in some of this white. I can use this white here just to help define a little bit of interest to this edge here. So just kind of cutting into the shape. This is why you don't really need to spend a lot of time on detail on the drawing stage, because in the early stages of adding the pastel, it all gets lost anyway. Just trying to stick to them hatching marks there. I'm going to keep this colour to hand as well. And now that I've got a sharp point, I should be able to get in a few more of these hatching marks, which stylistically I think will be quite nice. This little tiny lip here, it's just, I think, just an important little observational point. It's only a small area, but it's all the little bits that add up at the end. I'm trying to see how the back of, so this little tiny petal that's folding over here, I'm trying to see how the very back part of it is dark, and then it gradually goes to a lighter colour, and then it's the lightest edges at the front. So I could use the white, but I'm just going to see what the yellow looks like, just to create the light edge at the front. Maybe a little bit of the white. And then this would be sort of middle colour around the centre, and then you've got the dark just around the back. Okay, now it's all looking a little bit muted and flat, and you always get to this point in you know, a sketch, a piece of art that you do. Well, I always do anyway, and it's at this stage that, especially when I've put a little bit of work into it, I want to start adding some stronger darks, because it's the stronger darks that will kind of really lift it and pull all the other underlying tones together. So this is this darker brown that I picked out. Just want to see that it, just checking that it actually shows up, and it does. It's working quite nice. So I want to err on the side of not too much pressure, because I can always, it's a lot easier to go firmer and stronger and strengthen colours than it is to try and erase them back. So I'm just looking for the strongest areas of darks where there's shadows, and typically you'll get that closest to an edge, and then it will soften off as you work out, as you move out. This is all going to be a strong shadow, so what I can do is just draw around that edge, and then I can work the pencil out with that. And now here's a kind of good case in point about defocusing your eyes. If you defocus your eyes and look at the reference photograph, you'll see that the shadow, and that's very, very dark, it's almost like a black, isn't it? A very dark grey or a black. If you defocus your eyes, it all gets lost into this area, which just tells you how dark this area is. Even though it's got what looks like a pink hue to it, there's a little bit of pink in it. It's really, really dark. So this dark shadow and this tone here are actually quite similar. Okay, I think it's time to put a little bit of the green in. So I've got the two main green colours that I'm going to be using are this more olivey green and a bit more of a kind of a grassy green colour. And I'm going to start with that one just because it's a little bit more vibrant. So just an opportunity to get a bit more colour in there. And I'm looking at the light source on the reference photograph. So there's a strong light source on the right hand side of the stalk. So I'm going to strengthen this rear side. Same thing about pressure again, so where there's less green and a bit more yellow, I use less pressure, and then where it's more of this kind of grassy green colour, I can use a bit more pressure like I did that side of the stalk. Let's get the yellow, I want to keep that to hand as well, so nice strong yellow down there. Just want some of that green just to reflect into the bottom of the rose. And then I can take this olivey green and then start looking at some of the darker shapes. So it's all very dark on this side. And you'll see how much darker I need to go around here when this shadow is in. Because again, look at the reference photo, defocus your eyes, this left edge of this leaf gets lost into the shadow. There isn't a clearly defined line. And you'll see that even though that looks quite dark now, it's not going to be anywhere near it dark enough when I put in a really dark shadow. It's got a nice little highlight edge here, so I'm going to have to hold the pencil at a point and then really dig it in to get that to show up. Same on this one here. And then if we go back to that really dark brown and just add in the strongest shadow in here, again, hopefully that will kind of pull it all together. And let's just take a little thin line just down the bottom edge. You've got to draw that in quite carefully. It's only thin, only subtle. Okay, and then I'm just going to block in this shadow. Before I just put it all in as one solid colour, I'm just going to add a little bit of this pink to it, maybe a bit of the yellow as well. Just so it's not all one flat dull colour really. And then I had this lighter grey, which I don't really think I'll need, but might be nice just for the outer edges. Back to the darker one. So I want it really nice and strong right up against this edge. So that's now as much pressure as I can apply without feeling like I'm going to break the pencil. So remember I said about this area, I'm just going to take the shadow colour just over that left edge. Let me take some of the green on there as well. And then ideally you would just tip this up. I've taped this piece down, but tip it up and so the dust goes into a waste paper basket or whatever, however you're getting rid of it. I'm just going to have to blow it away and then clean the desk afterwards. And then I'm just going to work, this is the only time I'm going to do this really, just going to work that in a little bit just to give it a bit of softness. And then just with those shadows in, are there any areas, any form shadows, so shadows within the rose shape that you need to bring up a touch? I think these need to come up a little bit here. If you look around that area there, for example. And then I'm going to just use the black just around the very darkest areas. I'm going to use it really sparingly, but it's just around this left hand outer edge here. So drawing a bit of a line in, or drawing a bit of a line around the outer edge of the rose, just on this left hand side, and then just soften that off just with a little bit of hatching. I don't want to take it all the way into the shadow, definitely don't want to do that, it's going to flatten it too much. Do a bit of the black in there as well. Alright, and let's just add a little bit of colour into the leaf. So I just want to do this quite quickly. I'm just going to keep this quite loose. Maybe going to reserve some of the veins. There's a little bit of that yellow undertone, if you remember, from the very beginning of the draw and stroke painting. Olivey green, darker tone on the outer side. There's a nice little shadow here, just where the stalk travels over the top of the leaf. So we're just putting with this green first. I'm just doing like a wavy sort of line just to show the wavy shape of the leaf. Just a little detail, and it's simple enough to put in. Let's get in the shadow just so I can see what the various tones of the green look like. Again, put a little bit of pink in, bit of the green as well. It's not going to hurt. And then what about that leafy green? So maybe I can add a little touch of that in. I don't want too much because it's a very different green, but maybe just a touch here and there. Yeah, not sure how much I like that, but I'm just going to blend that in a little bit. It's not great. And then maybe see if I can salvage it with putting these in as highlights on the top. Okay, I'm going to leave this leaf alone. It's not great. I don't think it's great, but that's exactly what these sketchbook studies are for, to kind of figure things out instead of you just leaving it up to luck when you come to do a more worked up piece. You know, if I'd have spent loads of time on this on a big kind of pastel pencil or pastels piece, and then I do the leaf and I mess everything up with the leaf I'm not happy with, all that time is wasted. When just a few minutes in your sketchbook, you know, you can figure out some things that work, or like this, some things that don't work, and come up with a solution that you're happy with. Now what I'd like to do, just to loosen everything up and just to play about, because that's the whole point, I've no idea how this is going to work or what it's going to look like, but I'm just going to maybe add a little bits of tone around the outside, just here and there, just to see what it looks like, just to see if it adds anything to it or not. You know, what you could do is take a photograph beforehand of your little sketch, take a photograph of it, before and after, and see if one looks better than the other. So this is just a kind of a creamy colour I'm laying down just as a base, just so that any little colours that I then put on top of it are just going to have a bit more of a smoky, defocused texture to them. If I put the pastel straight into it, I'm going to have to spend quite a bit of time working the pastel into the paper, whereas with this little underlayer, it'll be a little bit quicker. Maybe a little bit of the yellow. Use the side of the pencil, just puts the tone in a little bit softer. And then what about if we just do a few little marks just around the outer edge, just to kind of loosen it up. See what that looks like. And you would never kind of have the bravery, would you, to do this on a piece that you'd spent hours and hours on. And yet if you don't do these kind of things, you're never going to know whether something works or not. All right, you get the idea anyway. So just playing about with the marks and touch here and there. Could probably go on all day and definitely ruin it, but we'll leave it at that. And then I'm going to come back, have a little break, come back, and we'll use the really cheap pastels and try and do this red rose here. Rose number 2 then. So I'm going to be using the really cheap pastels that I showed you earlier. So these are Inscribe, and I had a little check on Amazon this morning, and £15 these for a set of 64, which is really inexpensive for pastels. Amazon US are doing them for, I think it was $14, a little bit less than $14, and you can get the Inscribe on there, but they're also branded under Mungyo. So have a look for Mungyo. I'll put the name up on the screen so you can get the spelling of that. But I'm going to keep an open mind. You know, you typically get what you pay for with art materials, pastels particularly so, because they're mostly pigment. So we'll see what they're like. I had a little play about with them yesterday, just 5 minutes, quick 5-minute study, and you know, yeah, they were okay, but we'll see. So I'm going to draw this out now, and I'm going to do it bigger than this one, a little bit bigger than this one, as much as I can on this piece of paper here. Just because obviously with the pastels you can't get anything to a point really, although the square edges are going to help, you know, get a bit more of a point. So I'm just going to go a little bit bigger so I've got a bit more opportunity to get the shape right. I'm going to be drawing it out with a pastel pencil. If you don't have pastel pencils, don't worry about that at all. You can just use a graphite pencil if you want to. Just remember to erase that back so that it's only a very faint line, because the pastel won't sit on top of the graphite. And then what we'll do, the most important part of this exercise, after I've drawn it out, is to lay some of the colours just around the edge, just to see what they look like. And then we're going to choose just a small selection of pastels to complete the rose. All right, so let's draw this out. Basic shapes again. So just looking for some angles, and I'm just seeing this as it's kind of like a square stroke bucket shape. And then what I can do is focus on this one big petal here. Just choose one that looks to be the most dominant. Again, sticking to them straight lines. This is going to be looser and more painterly, which I'll talk about in a moment, but it's definitely going to be looser and more painterly than the one on the left. So I don't need to worry at all about the neatness of these lines and getting all these nice curves in, you know, more than ever. So the centre bit here is quite bitty, isn't it? There's lots of stuff going on, loads of little folds and stuff in the rose and the petals. So I want to ignore all of that for now, and you know, probably ignore all of that right until the very end as well. Probably not going to be able to put in any kind of detail there with those big thick pastels, because I'm going to avoid using pastel pencils on this just for the purposes of the exercise. Typically you would combine the two. You would use your soft pastels to block in large areas and get your underpainting in, and then towards the end of the painting, where you need more precision and detail, you would use some pastel pencils. And this is why pastel painting can be quite expensive, because you do need quite a broad set of materials in terms of colours and types of pencils, hard, soft pastels and the pastel pencils. But you know, I really think it's worth it, because I think it's a really underrated medium. Okay, and now I can start figuring out just a few of the little folds within there, but again, I'm not going to go and try and get every single one in. I'm going to lose all of those in a moment. Got this little guy just creeping out on the edge. So you can barely see that within the shadow. And this is probably a little bit close to this one now, thinking about it. Probably done it a little bit too big. So maybe I can make the shadow a little bit smaller. But again, it's a sketchbook study, it's not a piece of artwork, so it really doesn't matter. Look at that nice little negative space there. So just by looking at that shape there, helps me to draw this little angle in here. So I'm just adjusting this shadow. The shape of the shadow isn't right, but I'm doing that just so it'll fit on a little bit better. Let's take a little look at the colours then and start choosing some colours. So hopefully you can see, let me just move that so you can see all of them. Okay, so that's pretty much all 64 in the shot. And lots of different colours in there. You can see it's a nice range, nice set. I've got a bit of kitchen paper to hand just to wipe down the pastels if needs be. That'll be more important as I'm going through, particularly with the lighter colours. So you can see I've got a little selection of reds here, and even though a couple of these I'm thinking are probably going to work better than others, you definitely want to try them all out first, you know, particularly if it's the first time you've used a particular brand of pastels or any art material, because you never know what it's going to look like on your paper surface. Different colour paper surfaces, it's going to look different as well. So let's just try a few of these out and see what we think. So we've got that one there, which is quite a nice red. I'm just going to put these alongside it so I don't remember which one it is. And then our next red is a deeper red, plusher red. So that's going to be quite nice for the dark tone. So I'm really liking that one. That one's fine as well. It's maybe a little bit pinky. And the next one, so I quite like that one as well. That's a really vibrant red. Let's try this one. This is more of a, what I would call a cadmium red. So I do like that one. That's it's got some yellow tones in it, which I can definitely see within the reference, especially in the lighter areas. So I don't particularly like that. That's too pink for me. There's too much blue in that. Too purple. So out of those, I like this one here. I like both of these, to be honest. I think both of those would work. And this one's nice for some of those darks. Not the really strong darks, maybe, but some of the darker mid-tones. So I quite like that one. So I'm definitely going to keep this one. And then I could use both of these, but I want to keep it simple. So I'm just going to select one and I'm going to go for that one there. So this is maybe just a little bit too orange. I think if I use that and then we maybe use a yellow as well. So put some yellows down the side as well. I think that could work. I will relegate these to the sidelines. And then in terms of the yellows, I've got this kind of lemony yellow. And let's put that one there. Got this more of a kind of a canary cadmium yellow. And then this is an even lighter yellow. I don't really like that one, so I'm going to put that one straight back. Now before I make a decision on which of these yellows to go with, it's always a good idea to just test it with the reds that you're going to choose, or the other colours that you're going to choose, and just see how different colours work together. So straight away I'm looking at that and thinking, it's a little bit dull, it's a bit going to make things a bit too orange. Much prefer that one. So I'm going to put this one back. So far this is the winner. These two are going to be quite similar. So maybe let's just put some up there. I think to all intents and purposes these two are going to be the same. So I'll put that one back and I'll keep this one. That needs a little bit of a clean, but so far we've got, hopefully you can see those, we've got these three, a couple of reds and a yellow. Definitely going to need a white. These are quite useful as well, these two. You can see there's a black, kind of more like a chalk stick. Just a little bit easier to get a bit more control with. So I don't need both of them, and I don't think I'll be putting lots of white in this, so I'll put that one back and just stick to that one there. Now what about some stronger colours? So we need some strong tones and values for the shadow areas. And I could use a dark grey, and I probably will need to use a dark grey. So let's just take that one out. Something along those lines. I might just, that's quite dark, that, so I might end up just using that and not going with the black. But I think it would be nice as well to have another colour in there underneath the shadow. And I always like a purple for shadows, so And that's a really vibrant purple, but I think that could look quite nice. Again, we can test it out. The red and the purple together. And it does kind of neutralize the purple quite nicely. It's not too vibrant, which is what you want in the shadow tone, in the shadow area. You don't want it to be too vibrant. It's got to be muted. It's got to be greyed down. And I quite like that. So I'm going to use that for some of the shadow tones. I think that would work quite well. But that was just luck. I picked that one out. You could pick out maybe a dark green would work. A kind of an olivey, browny green, I think that is. I think that would work potentially. But I think this will add a nice little bit of vibrancy, so we'll stick with that one. Now, I don't know how well that colour combination is going to work. Even something of this size, and even though it's probably only going to take, I don't know, half an hour, maybe at most, maybe a little bit longer if I'm talking things through, it's probably too big and too lengthy even just to play about. In reality, what I would do in the sketchbook is I would do kind of blocks of colour with different colour combinations, maybe just do one petal or something that represents a petal, and in that way I can say, well, I like this colour combination best, so now let's take that to a slightly more detailed study like this one, and then if I'm happy with that, then you could take it on to a bigger, more worked up piece. All right, let's get going then. So I'm just going to put these to one side, just so they're out of the way. And first thing I'm going to do is going to look at the strongest darks and the midtones and the lights. And I want to put in a base colour to represent those. So my strong darks, and pastel painters often refer to this as underpainting, by the way. So if you hear them talk about an underpainting, very often the underpainting is not representative at all of the final colours. It could be completely different colours underneath, but they are representative of the values. So I'm going to use this purple to put in these darker areas. So I'm just looking at that large dark shadow area on that side. This as well, I think, because these are soft pastels, or softish, it's going to have a more painterly feel. So this is a more sketchy feel where individual pencil marks are showing through. This is going to be more painterly. So I will be doing a lot more blending and rubbing the pastel into the surface. And you'll see that in a moment. And this is obviously a really strong dark as well. So even though there's a very strong dark and a lighter dark within that, I'm not too worried at this stage. I just want to cover the paper surface with what I would consider a shadow. So this is dark. I could block the shadow in as well at this stage, but the only problem with that is you lose the outer edge of your actual, in this case the rose, and it can just be a bit confusing as to where the shapes are that you've drawn out. So I tend to do the shadows towards the end, the actual cast shadows, that is. A little bit of shadow on here, just leaving that little area there where I can see a bit of light. So there's some darks and all kinds of stuff going on in there that I'm not going to be able to put in with any kind of accuracy with these chunky pastels. A nice strong shadow in there, and then we've got this cast shadow, so a really nice cast shadow just here. And then let's just take a little bit of the colour, but just more lightly through there, just around this bottom edge, and I'll leave the green, and then I'm going to work this in. So I'm going to really work this into the paper surface. So I'm going to be getting rid of more of the pastel dust as well. Just tip that away if you're working and you can move your paper. Just tip it into a dustbin, have that to one side. I'm going to have to just blow it onto the desk, which my wife will not be too happy with because she's got to work on this in an hour or so. You can just maybe take that just into the shadow. And what a day to decide to put a white t-shirt on, not a good choice. Alright, so next colour then I'm going to put down is this yellow. Because I can see some yellow undertones under there. And if I just put the red in straight away, it's going to be really quite a little bit boring, isn't it? Just one red colour. You know, the beauty of pastels or any paint medium is that you can allow lots of different colours to show through underneath and kind of merge with one another. And by the end of the painting, it's only quite subtle, but it just adds an extra dimension rather than just one kind of solid flat base colour. These pastels as well, although they are very new to me, I can already tell, there's quite a lot of pigment in these, I'm surprised for the price of them, how much pigment is in them. And I can already tell that I'm going to be able to lay over whites, strong whites and stronger lighter tones over the top of darker ones, much more so than the pastel pencils. And that's typical with pastels, but I didn't quite think it would be as typical with these really cheap ones, but we'll wait and see. That might be the kiss of death. Okay, and then we can work that in again. Now I've got a little bit of purple, see, from when I worked that in, so just get rid of that on the tissue, just the excess. You don't have to go and wash your hands or anything like that, but not worried about breaking the edges of the drawing either. Not worried at all about that. Alright, so now we can put in some red, and I can't remember which is the lightest one. They look so similar, so let me just test those out again up here. Okay, so that's the darker one. So I've got this red here. I'm going to go into the shadow area, and you can see, look how muted that red is, and that's exactly what we want. So we don't want it to be a bright vibrant red in the shadow area. And I've got to be careful here. So this is the outside of the rose. And what the underpainting does as well, I mean, you can see the purple coming through that anyway, but very often you'll just get little edges, just very often around the outside edges, that just show through, and it can be really nice, really nice effect if you choose your colour for your underpainting, wisely. Then there's no rules for that. Yes, there is colour theory in terms of colour strings and colour schemes. We've got some good videos on that on YouTube, by the way, on our YouTube channel, so you can take a look at those. And there are some theories and definitely practices that work, complementary colours, that kind of thing. But ultimately, it's about testing and playing about and seeing what works. Try and break the rules and come up with something that maybe breaks all the rules, but that really works quite well. Alright, and now I'm going to take this red. Look how different that is. So just taking it over the top of the yellow, and let's try and remember where the actual petals are. Okay, so I am now just going to go back in with the yellow, maybe take the white as well, just keep that to hand, and I just want to start re-establishing some of the shapes and some of the bits and pieces that I've lost. So there's kind of a petal form here. So there's a lighter edge up here, there's a little touch of highlight just there. Might be better with the white actually, but just see what I can get in with the yellow. Definitely some up here that I've lost. Let's use the white here. Let's see some pinker tones. So there I just laid a little bit more red pigment down. Don't know if you could see that. I laid a little bit more red pigment down, maybe a little bit of yellow as well, just to kind of create a bit more orange, and then a bit of white, and then I can just blend those together just to reduce the value of that area, so lighten it off, but without making it too pink. So if I'd have just gone in with the white, that then obviously blends with the red, and makes a pink colour, and just by adding a bit of a bit of the yellow. It just helps to keep it a bit more of an orangey red. I really quite like this purple. I think it's going to work quite well. And then in kind of similar fashion as I did with the lights, let's just re-establish some of the darks. So I'm going to go over this with a grey in a moment, just to really strengthen the strongest darks. Let's just get this nice strong shadow in. So just digging this yellow in, just where there's just a few highlight edges. So the reason I'm just touching in some red just on the outer edges there is because it's quite a delicate fiddly area, and I've put some yellows in there, I've put some purples in there, and a lot of the red has got lost. But I don't want to start messing about with it too much and putting, trying to put the red over the yellows and the purples that are in there. So by just touching some of the red on the outer edges, it just tells the eye that all of this in here is red, it's just that it's within shadow. Just at the bottom of the form here, let's just touch a little bit of purple, same for here, just to give the impression that it's folding under. And so only right at the very bottom. This is a strong dark down here, isn't it? So just here, this is a good example of reflected light, something called reflected light. So if you look in this shadow area here, I'll just use this one just to point it out a little bit better. If you look in this shadow area here, where there's kind of an obvious line, isn't there? Everything to the left of this should be dark, completely dark. The light source is coming from this direction, so after this point, everything should be dark. So why is it that this little slither here, just on the edge of the rose, is lighter than this bit? And that's called reflected light. So the light is coming from this area, it's bouncing off something over here, and it's coming back, and it's just ever so slightly lighting up this area. And this is very, very common. Whenever you see anything that's got that slight spherical shape to it, you'll more often than not get this reflected light that's coming on this side, in this case the left hand side here, and the darkest area will be down the middle. So don't just kind of shade everything to one side in the same value. You'll get an extra believability, an extra sense of realism, even within this, which is not realistic, if you observe that reflected light. So what I'm going to do now is take this dark grey and just add some of the strongest darks. I actually quite like it as it is, and it might be that I end up spoiling it a bit with this, but this is a sketchbook study. It's about seeing what works and what doesn't. What I could do is take a photograph at this stage and then put this on, take another photograph and compare the two later on. But you should be willing to some extent to ruin the artwork that you do in your sketchbook, because it's only by taking that attitude of I don't really care if I mess things up. It's only by taking that attitude that you'll experiment and that you'll come across things that work. What's that phrase, that motivational saying? The more that you fail, the faster you'll improve, because the quicker you learn what doesn't work, and you're willing to push your boundaries and experiment and find things that if you stay within your comfort zone and you're always trying to make a perfect, good-looking piece of art, you'll never discover. So I'm going to take this dark grey and I'm going to start adding it to the darkest shadow areas. Now, I don't typically use a blending stump, not very often. Somebody put a question in the group the other day, how do you clean a blending stump? I thought you peeled them. because I don't use them very often, and apparently not. You can use a pencil sharpener or a piece of sandpaper. So if you want to use a blending stump on this, you can do. But the reason I'm not is because I want to keep it quite loose and painterly, and I just think a blending stump would, I just think it's a bit unnecessary. But if you don't like the feel of the pastels on your fingers and you want to use that instead of you want to use a blending stump instead, or a brush, a small paintbrush, you could do that. So this shadow here looks really, really strong. So I'm really just touching this ever so lightly in this area here, because I don't want to go overboard. I don't know if you can hear all of that racket in the background, but what I do is I say of a morning, I'm just going to go and do a little bit of filming. If you can just keep the noise down a little bit, I'd appreciate that. So what do they do? Every single day, play Hungry Hippos. Noisiest game there is. Noisiest game we own. So it is quite tricky kind of figuring all this little bit out in the centre with these chunky pastels. But I think that'll do. I'm just going to leave it as that and now put a little bit of work into the shadow, and then we'll do some greens. So before I just put the grey into the shadow, I want to add some purple, because again I want that to show as a bit of an underlayer. I don't want this just completely boring flat grey. And one thing that is quite important here is, just to tell you as I'm working this in, I want to make sure that this shadow edge here, I don't have, you see these little white flecks just around the outer edge? I don't want that, because that creates like a halo effect. And if you look, and this is the case with most cast shadows, all cast shadows, the form, so in this case the rose is the form, will merge and blend into the shadow until it's almost the same value. So if you defocus your eyes and you look at the value difference between this outer edge red petal and the shadow, it's slightly lighter, but there's not a great deal of difference. So I don't want any kind of halo white edge, even in something that's a bit looser and more painty like this one. I don't want that halo edge. And then I could go in with the grey, but just because this is going to be a little bit easier to work with, this black, it's a bit thinner, I'm just going to create an outline edge around the rose, around the form. I'll take it all the way down into this leaf as well. And there's just a little touch, might be a bit too strong the black there, but there's a little kind of shadow just behind the top edge of this rose, which is just going to help define that top petal. And then when I've put that in, I'm just going to take some of the black colour out. So rather than using the point now at an angle, I'm just using the flat edge of it, just so I can lay tone down a bit more quickly. And it's too black at the moment, but if we work that into the purple, that's going to blend and mix. Okay, so I forgot to pick out some greens. I'm just going to test a few now. So there's our colours for the stalk and the stem. So let's get, I quite like this one, it's quite a nice light cool green. And we'll use this one for the outer edge of the stalk there. And let's get this darker green as well, just so we can get some of the little shadows in there. And then right down, just with the point of the pastel as best you can on the outer edge. And if you lose too much of the green underneath, you can always put a little bit back in. And then this is the white here, so I've got a real nice strong highlight here. So I'm going to really dig this pastel in, just so I can get that to register. And then there's a little bit of an edge. I'm going to struggle, let's see if I can find a point. Just a little thin edge there that I can maybe get in. Let's get that negative shape in then with this really dark grey. That's going to really help lift those two leaves. And then I'm going to put some on this leaf as well, because this is quite a dark colour underneath. Not as much pressure because I want to allow some of the green underneath it to show. Just touching a little bit of purple into the shadow there, just for a bit of continuity purposes more than anything else, but it looks quite nice against the green. Alright, just have a little step back and then just have a look if there's any darks you need to strengthen, any highlights you want to brighten. So I'm going to go really strong just around this outer edge here. I think I want to strengthen this edge here. Hopefully what you could see, what I was doing there is just strengthening some of the darks with the black and some little kind of outline edges, but only here and there. So I'm not outlining the whole thing. I've got a little bit up here and then a bit round the bottom, but I've left this area, a bit round this bottom here, but I don't want to take it all the way up. A little touch of the red into the cast shadow, just at the edges where it'll show up. Alright, I'm going to leave it at that I think for this study. It's given me a good introduction to these particular pastels, and you can see the style is very different to this one over here. It's more painterly, it's more stylistic I guess you'd call it, with the purple in there. And I've got to say I'm quite impressed with these. For £15, $15, I think they're a really good bargain. They've layered a lot more than I would have expected, particularly on, this is quite a smooth pastel paper, this side of the Canson. So not a lot of tooth there, and they've layered really quite well. Now I just wanted to finish this lesson just talking through some of the things that I would think about when choosing different materials for different subjects. So I rarely ever draw or paint flowers. It's not really my thing. I tend to stick to portraits, animals, figures, maybe some kind of still life as well, but not florals. And if I was doing florals again, I wouldn't use pastel pencils. So pastel pencils, in my opinion, are great for subjects where you've got quite small detail, quite fine details, whether that be a portrait or an animal with, fur. Or what did I do recently? I did a pastel pencil still life of some old boots. So there was kind of the laces and the lace holes in there. And the sketchy style where the pencil strokes are showing through worked quite nicely for that. But I think with a floral, pencil strokes, at least in this particular study, don't work quite as well. I think it looks better in this painterly style, not necessarily this kind of stylistic approach with the purples in there, but this softer, more painterly approach. I would always use soft pastels for florals if ever I was going to do that in the future as a more deliberate piece of art. And I would nearly always combine the soft pastels with the pastel pencils. Unless I was going for something that was really loose and painterly, I'd always use the pastel pencils in combination with the softer pastels, just because it helps you with the edges, defining the edges and any kind of smaller details. So there's obviously no hard and fast rules for which medium works best with which subject matter. They can all work with all different subject matters. The more you play about with your materials in your sketchbook, the more you'll get a feel for it. So I personally would never reach for pastel pencils if I was going to do a floral in future with my style. I would always go for the softer pastels, or I probably just wouldn't do florals because it's not really my subject matter. But for portraits, I much prefer using pastel pencils than I do pastels. I just prefer the style and the feel of them. What I hope this has shown you more than anything else is that if you don't have the materials that exactly match your reference, whether you're working from life or a photograph, you can still make them work. You can still make a reasonably nice piece of art or some nice studies in your sketchbook. Have a bit of fun, even if you don't have the exact materials. All right, so I hope you have a go with this one. If you don't have pastels of any description, I think it's a really, really underrated medium, particularly pastel pencils, because they are mess-free and they've got that familiar feel of a pencil to them. And I always encourage people, newcomers, more experienced artists alike, who don't have experience with pastels, to go out and get some. Pastel pencils is a good introduction without having to buy the really expensive soft pastel stuff. And there's lots of subject matter that they are just fantastic for. I probably haven't done them justice with the floral, but portraits, still life, lots of different types of still life figures, really, really great for that. And much easier, than and less time consuming than coloured pencils. So please do consider them. Maybe you can go out and get this really cheap set of pastels, and there's lots of subjects that these would work with. So I think, let's have a think. So like an avocado half, cut open half an avocado, something like that would work really well with these pastels. A simple pear or a lemon or an onion, really simple still life, I think would be fantastic with this, and different types of florals as well. So please do have a go. I'd love to see the attempts in the group and on Art Tutor, wherever you post them. And I'm going to go away and have another think of the next lesson. Requests are welcome as ever. And until next time, stay safe, stay well, and I'll see you soon.